It was an intentional choice on my part to let you hear that song without introduction and without visuals. Some of you may already be familiar with it as part of the movie Frozen 2, while others of you only know that it's from that movie because it said so on the screen. In any case, I wanted you to focus on the words of the song and their immediate impact on you. Suffice it to say that in the movie, one of the main characters sings this song in a time of great personal loss, when she is in an actual dark hole in the ground as she sinks into grief and depression. Of course, given the time constraints of a feature film and the need to keep a story going, she finds her way out, both literally and figuratively, in the course of a 3.5-minute song, rather than the months or years of therapy it would take in the real world. And she does this primarily by resolving to follow some advice she was previously given, that she should focus only on the next right thing she must do. I decided to include the song in this service because beyond the specifics of fictional events in an animated movie, it speaks to us powerfully of the situation in which we all find ourselves. Between worsening climate change, a corrupt and arguably criminal presidency, a deeply inequitable economy, a pandemic that has claimed almost 180,000 American lives, and a long overdue reckoning on racial injustice and white supremacy, it's clear to anybody paying attention that nothing will ever be the same again. We're trying to find our way through this. We're hanging on to what's been called the roller coaster as best we can. And it's such a confusing ride that it's too much to look too far ahead. Even hope can sometimes be overwhelming. And yet, to refer back to Elizabeth Alexander's song with which we began our service, we know that we need to roll up our sleeves and get to work. But how on earth do we do that? A couple of years ago, I was struggling to deal with what my doctor diagnosed as situational depression. I wasn't alone in this, he said, and indeed the rise in cases of depression and anxiety following the 2016 election had been well documented. Still, knowing that it wasn't just me didn't do a whole lot to help me feel better. And I didn't have the luxury of taking a big picture view of things. That just made me anxious with everything that was wrong, with everything that could go wrong. I had to focus on what was right in front of me, setting aside everything else in the world that was screaming at me and concentrating on something that I could actually get done. One such task was putting together a service for Sunday morning, in a process I still use even now that our services are held via Zoom rather than in our sanctuary. I'd choose hymns and find a reading that supported the message of my sermon. I'd select or write an invocation and a chalice lighting that fit with the theme of the service. I'd outline my script for the service as a whole and fill out everything but the sermon itself. I'd decide how one service element would transition into the next, all of the pieces fitting together like a puzzle, with the sermon itself the last piece to complete it. Going through this process each week helped to keep my depression from getting the better of me, because it was something that I could do. It also helped me to manage my anxiety. Even at the best of times, when we're faced with some huge task that needs to be completed, particularly if there's a deadline, we can be overwhelmed with everything that needs to be done. And even though it all needs to be done, it can't all be done at once. The only way we can tackle it is to break it down into pieces and then break those pieces down into smaller chunks, and then break those chunks down into individual steps. This not only makes the tasks manageable, because in practice, the only way to get anything done is to do it one step at a time, but it also helps to reduce our anxiety by allowing ourselves to focus on what comes next. This is the nature of reality, and it's the nature of our ability to bring about change. As illustrated by the Tao Te Ching, a tree that fills the arms grew from the tiniest sprout. A tower of 9 stories was built from small bricks of clay. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Taking that first step and then taking the next step is all there is. Once I started looking, it wasn't hard to find a number of quotes, pieces of wisdom to that effect. As science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke put it, the only real problem in life is what to do next. Christian missionary and author Elizabeth Elliot gave one answer to that problem. When you don't know what to do next, just do the thing in front of you. Motivational speaker and author Dennis Waitley says, don't dwell on what went wrong. Instead, focus on what to do next, which takes a bit of unpacking. The key word there is dwell. We shouldn't pretend the past didn't happen. It's an opportunity to learn, and it stays with us as part of our experience. However, we shouldn't get hung up on the past to the detriment of the present. Our experience is preparation for what comes next, and that's what matters. Author Glennon Doyle makes it clear. Just do the next right thing, one thing at a time. And Catholic priest and theologian Henri Nouwen made it a matter of practical spirituality, explaining that spiritual maturity is not knowing what to do with your whole life, but just knowing what to do next. This morning, Joanne shared with us a story about the Reverend John Berry Meacham. He was born into slavery in Virginia in the late 18th century, and as a young man, he was able to buy freedom for himself, going on to buy freedom for his father, for his wife and children, and for other enslaved people. When he was ordained, he became the minister of the newly formed First African Baptist Church of St. Louis. Passionate about the importance of education, Meacham ran a school for black children in the church basement, at least until a new state law against educating African Americans forced him to close the school. Faced with the problem of what to do next, Meacham made a way out of no way. He reopened his school on a steamboat on the Mississippi, which was under federal rather than state jurisdiction. He found one thing he could do, creating the floating freedom school so that he could continue his work, so that he could live his faith and values. Sometimes we're fortunate enough to be able to choose our way forward. We did this as a congregation back at the beginning of March, when after 3 months of intense conversation that built on 2 years of self-examination, we decided to sell our properties on Youngs Mill Lane and look for a bigger church building elsewhere. Of course, less than a week after we made that decision, everything about how we do church changed, thanks to the pandemic. But we didn't falter. We took the step we needed to take, moving services, programs, and meetings online. We also continue the work of figuring out what we need to do to be ready to move to a bigger property. And sometimes it's not about being able to choose or even taking a step. Sometimes it's just about breathing. Sometimes the next right thing for us to do is simply to breathe. Following conversations with some friends of ours, not to mention the ongoing uncertainty about what school will look like this year, Alison and I have decided to move to Gloucester. So we're doing what we can to get ready to sell our house, which is also a great opportunity to get rid of some clutter. But mostly it's a matter of waiting until the right place becomes available for us to buy. And there's nothing we can do to hurry that up. There's no point worrying about when or even if that will happen. But one thing we can do while we're waiting is to breathe. Similarly, I must admit that the thought of actually packing everything up and moving makes me very anxious. So when that happens, I remind myself to breathe. And as long as I can take that next breath, I'll be able to take the next step when the time comes. And when the opportunity presents itself, I'll be able to make the next choice too. In her meditation, we hold hope close. The Reverend Teresa Soto explains that we don't always know what comes next, but that cannot dissuade us. We don't always know just what to do, but that will not mean that we are lost in the wilderness. We can always take the next breath, the next step, the next choice, something that moves us forward, if only by a tiny, even imperceptible amount, something that not only gets us closer to our goal, but that also reminds us that we still have the power to move ourselves closer. As Dr. King put it in a recollection by Marian Wright Edelman, just because you can't see the whole stairway, that doesn't mean you don't take the first step. Keep moving, Dr. King said to Edelman. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But keep moving. For some, this is a good working definition of faith. But in her meditation, Soto explains that it's more about relying on the foundation of our values and ethics. For as Unitarian Universalists, we are guided by love and by the truth that we are greater together than we are alone. And we put those values into practice in our ethic of covenant and the movement forward of one right action and the next, because that's what it will take for us to arrive, all of us together, at the beloved community. Now, I have long loved the idea, which goes back to the 19th century Unitarian preacher Theodore Parker, of the arc of the moral universe as the way that we get to the beloved community. Parker explained that though he couldn't figure it out rationally, he had faith that it bent toward justice. And Dr. King built on that idea in his speeches, making this a promise to those striving for civil rights. But it has never been true that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice all by itself. The universe itself has no morality. The cosmos doesn't owe us anything. Rather, this is about what is moral to us, what justice means to us. And that means that if we want the arc of the moral universe to bend toward justice, we're the ones who need to bend it. So I speak of applying the weight of our souls to bend it. And because I was a physicist in a former life, I think of a long moment arm stretching out from history, and I remember Archimedes saying, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." That's what we're called to finish our breakfasts and roll up our own sleeves to do. To use every right action that we undertake to apply a little more pressure until the arc of the moral universe bends all the way into the beloved community. So what is the next right action? More to the point, what is the next right action for you? Let me be clear that I don't expect any of us to have a very good idea of what's ahead. 2020 has proved that all bets are off, from murder hornets to 2 hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico at the same time, not to mention a small asteroid that may hit the Earth the day before the election. So the question is, what is it that is in front of you right now? Perhaps for you, the next right action is to breathe. Always remember to breathe. Just about every spiritual practice worth its salt begins with breathing. And if that's what you need to do right now, just keep breathing. That's perfectly okay. Perhaps the next right action for you is something you can do in defiance of everything that you cannot do. Maybe you can sign up with UU the Vote to give someone a ride next month so that they can cast their absentee vote early, because preventing the dismantling of the Postal Service is not within your power. Maybe you can attend the virtual march on Washington this week, because you can't be part of a physical event in DC. Maybe you can participate in AJ Van Tyne's ordination via Zoom on Saturday afternoon, because you can't go to California to lift up his ministry. Maybe you can read White Fragility and reflect on what it means to you, because you can't change anybody but yourself. Or perhaps there are many ways for you to move forward through one right action and the next, in which case, choose one. Choose one way forward and own it. Make it yours and allow it to let you make a difference. The future is not only undetermined, but also uncertain. We are indeed at a tipping point where the next choice, the next step, even the next breath could make a difference. In the face of daunting possibilities, we still have the power to move closer to the beloved community, to take the next right action and the next that will get us there. We know that our way forward is filled with setbacks and challenges, but we still have faith that it will get us where we need to go. May it be so.